Have you ever made a mistake so small that you apologized 3 times, yet somehow it changed everything? Like accidentally putting sugar in someone's black coffee or delivering food to the wrong table, only to discover that single error was exactly what the universe intended. Chen knew that feeling better than most. For 24 years, she'd been apologizing for taking up space, for speaking too softly, for existing in a world that seemed designed for louder, bolder people. But what if I told you that sometimes our biggest mistakes are actually our greatest gifts? That the table you were never supposed to serve might be exactly where you needed to be? This is Chen, and this is the story of how one mixed-up order on one ordinary Tuesday in Denver, Colorado, revealed a truth that had been hidden for 8 long years, reuniting a broken family and proving that sometimes the quietest voices carry the most important messages. Chen had perfected the art of blending into backgrounds. At 24, she moved through Rosewood Family Restaurant like a whisper, present but barely noticed, efficient but never celebrated. Her manager, Mrs. Patricia Rosewood, often said Emma had the gentlest touch with difficult customers, though Emma herself never quite believed compliments were meant for keeping. They felt borrowed, like library books that had to be returned eventually. The morning routine at Rosewood never varied. Emma would arrive 40 minutes before opening, not because she was required to, but because the quiet kitchen felt like sanctuary. She'd check each table setting twice, ensure the salt and pepper shakers were perfectly aligned, and arrange the daily specials board with careful precision. The other servers thought she was obsessive. Emma thought she was trying to make herself useful enough to keep. Foster care teaches you that nothing belongs to you permanently, not even the bed you sleep in, her mind would whisper as she folded napkins into perfect triangles. But Rosewood had been different. 3 years of steady employment, 3 years of Mrs. Rosewood's patient guidance, 3 years of slowly learning that some places might actually want you to stay. Mrs. Patricia Rosewood was 68 years old, with silver hair that caught the morning light streaming through the restaurant's front windows. She'd built Rosewood Family Restaurant from nothing 25 years ago, back when the neighborhood was rough and rent was cheap. Now gentrification crept closer each month, bringing trendy cafes and artisanal everything, but Patricia held firm to her vision of a place where working families could afford a decent meal. Emma watched Patricia move through the dining room each morning, greeting regular customers by name, asking about their children's soccer games and their grandmother's arthritis. Patricia remembered everyone's story, everyone's favorite booth, everyone's particular way of taking their coffee. She was the kind of woman Emma had always imagined having as a mother, if she'd been the kind of child who deserved mothers like that. The photograph behind the register showed a younger Patricia with her late husband Robert and their teenage son Michael. Robert had died in a car accident 12 years ago, leaving Patricia to run the restaurant alone. Michael had enlisted in the army right after his father's funeral, needing distance from grief that felt too heavy for a 19-year-old to carry. He'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan, coming home briefly between deployments, but each return grew shorter, more strained. 8 years ago, Michael had left Denver after a terrible argument with his mother. Patricia never spoke about what they'd fought over, but Emma had noticed how her eyes lingered on the photograph, how she kept Michael's favorite booth empty every Tuesday evening just in case. Hope, Emma realized, could be both beautiful and heartbreaking. The Tuesday mornings started like any other. Emma arrived early to find Patricia already in the kitchen, prepping vegetables for the lunch rush. Her movements were slower lately, though. She tried to hide it behind her usual brisk efficiency. At 78, Patricia should have been considering retirement, but the restaurant was her life, her legacy, her way of honoring Robert's memory. "Morning, sweetheart," Patricia called without looking up from her chopping. Breakfast crowds, coming in heavy today, School board meeting last night went late, so half the parents will be dragging themselves in here for coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Emma smiled, tying her apron and checking the coffee machine. She'd learned to read the neighborhood rhythms through Patricia's observations. PTA meetings meant tired parents and extra orders of pancakes for cranky children. City council sessions brought clusters of concerned citizens who lingered over coffee, planning their next moves. High school football games filled the restaurant with celebrating families or consoling ones, depending on the score. The morning rush began with familiar faces. Mr. Davidson from the hardware store ordered his usual wheat toast and black coffee, sitting in booth 3 where he could watch the street for customers. Mrs. Rodriguez brought her twin toddlers, who immediately began rearranging the sugar packets while she tried to drink her latte before it went cold. Dr. Martinez grabbed his coffee to go, heading to the clinic where he'd spend the day treating patients who couldn't afford fancy medical practices. Emma moved between tables with practiced efficiency, taking orders, delivering food, refilling coffee cups before they emptied. She developed an internal radar for customer needs, anticipating requests before they were made. It was easier than waiting to be asked, safer than risking someone's irritation at having to repeat themselves. Around 10:30, the breakfast rush began to thin. Emma was clearing booth 7 when she noticed the new customer at table 12. He sat with his back straight, eyes scanning the room in a way that seemed both alert and weary. Dark hair showed grey at the temples, and his hands wrapped around his coffee mug like he was trying to absorb its warmth. Something about his posture suggested military training, the kind of awareness that never fully switched off. Emma approached with her order pad, noting the careful way he'd positioned himself to see both entrances. "Good morning. Can I start? You with something to drink, or would you like to hear about our specials?" He looked up and Emma was struck by his eyes, deep brown with lines that spoke of too much sun and too little sleep. "Coffee's fine for now, maybe some breakfast in a minute." His voice carried a slight rasp, like he wasn't used to talking much. "Take your time," Emma said softly, refilling his cup. "I'll check back in a few minutes." As she moved away, she caught Patricia emerging from the kitchen, her arms full of fresh bread baskets. Their eyes met across the dining room, and Patricia's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Her gaze moved to table 12, then back to Emma, a small crease forming between her eyebrows. The stranger at table 12 ordered simply, "Scrambled eggs, wheat toast, hash browns, nothing fancy, nothing that would draw attention." He ate slowly, methodically, pausing occasionally to look around the room. Emma found herself watching him from the corner of her eye, though she couldn't say why. Maybe it was the careful way he cut his food, or how he sat perfectly still when he wasn't actively eating, or the way his eyes seemed to catalogue every detail of the restaurant's interior. Near the end of the lunch prep, Emma was carrying a tray of clean glasses when her shoe caught the edge of the rubber mat behind the counter. She stumbled, catching herself, but sending several glasses sliding across. The tray fell, shattering against the floor in a cascade of crystal fragments that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet restaurant. "Oh no, I'm so sorry," Emma gasped, immediately dropping to her knees to gather the pieces. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment. As conversations paused and heads turned her way, "Emma, honey, stop," Patricia called from across the room. "Leave that, I'll get the broom." But Emma couldn't stop. Her hands shook as she picked up the larger shards, desperate to fix her mistake, to minimize the disruption she'd caused. A piece of glass sliced across her palm, drawing a thin line of blood, but she barely noticed. "Miss, you're bleeding," came a quiet voice beside her. The stranger from table 12 had approached, kneeling down beside her on the floor. "Here, let me help." He gently took her injured hand, examining the cut with practiced efficiency. "It's not deep, but you should clean it. From his pocket he produced a clean handkerchief, pressing it gently against her palm. Pressure stops the bleeding. Emma stared at him, surprised by his kindness. Most customers would have looked away, annoyed by the disruption. Instead, he was helping her, treating her injury with the calm competence of someone who dealt with much worse. "Thank you," she whispered, accepting the handkerchief. "I'm usually more careful. I don't know what happened." "Accidents happen," he said simply. "Nothing to apologize for." Patricia arrived with the broom and dustpan, taking in the scene with sharp eyes. The stranger stood, nodding politely to her before returning to his table. Patricia swept up the remaining glass, while Emma pressed the handkerchief to her cut, watching the man who'd helped her. "Who is he?" Emma asked quietly. Patricia paused, in her sweeping, glancing toward table 12. "I'm not sure," she said slowly, "but something about him seems familiar." The afternoon crowd was lighter, mostly regulars stopping by for coffee and pie. Emma worked with her hand bandaged, the stranger's handkerchief tucked safely in her apron pocket. She planned to wash it and return it before he left, a small gesture of gratitude for his unexpected kindness. Around 3 o'clock, Emma was taking inventory in the supply closet when she heard raised voices from the dining room. She emerged to find Mrs. Henderson from the Neighborhood Association standing by table 12, her face flushed with indignation. "I don't care if you think you have a right to be here," Mrs. Henderson was saying, her voice carrying across the restaurant. "This is a family establishment. We don't need your kind bringing trouble to our neighborhood." The stranger sat very still, his hands flat on the table, but Emma could see the tension in his shoulders. Other customers had stopped eating, uncomfortable with the confrontation, but unsure whether to intervene. "Ma'am," the stranger said quietly, "I'm just trying to have some lunch." "Don't you ma'am me," Mrs. Henderson snapped. "I know what you people are like. All the problems you bring with you, PTSD, drinking, violence. We've worked hard to make this neighborhood safe." Emma felt anger rise in her chest, hot and unfamiliar. She'd spent years watching people be cruel to those who couldn't defend themselves, and something about Mrs. Henderson's words hit too close to home. Before she could think better of it, she was moving across the dining room. "Mrs. Henderson," Emma said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Is there a problem with your order?" "This isn't about my order," Mrs. Henderson replied, turning her glare on Emma. "This is about the standards we maintain in this establishment." "Our only standard," Emma said quietly, "is treating everyone with respect. Just like this gentleman treated me when I had an accident earlier." She looked directly at the stranger, whose expression had shifted to something like surprise. "Your lunch is on the house today," Emma continued. "Consider it a thank you for your kindness." Mrs. Henderson huffed in disgust, gathering her purse. "I'll be speaking to Patricia about this, about both of you." She stalked out, leaving the restaurant in uncomfortable silence. Emma stood by table 12, suddenly aware that every eye in the place was on her. She'd never spoken up like that before, never inserted herself into a conflict. Her hand shook slightly as she reached for the stranger's empty coffee cup. "You didn't have to do that," he said softly. "Yes, I did," Emma replied, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "Everyone deserves to eat in peace." He studied her face for a long moment. "What's your name?" "Emma. Emma Chen." "Thank you, Emma. I'm David." He paused, seeming to weigh his words. "David Rosewood." Emma's hand froze on his coffee cup. Rosewood, like the restaurant, like Patricia's last name. She looked at him more carefully, seeing something familiar in the line of his jaw, the shape of his eyes. The photograph behind the register flashed. In her mind, a teenage boy with dark hair and serious eyes, standing between his parents. "Michael?" she whispered. His face went very still. Nobody's called me that in a long time. Emma sank into the booth across from him, her legs suddenly unsteady. You're Patricia's son. You're Michael. He nodded slowly. I go by David now. David Michael Rosewood. It's easier that way. She doesn't know you're here. No. David's voice was rough with emotion. I wasn't sure I was ready to see her. I've been sitting here for 2 hours trying to work up the courage. Emma looked toward the kitchen, where Patricia was probably preparing for the dinner rush, unaware that her son, the son she'd waited for every Tuesday for 8 years, was sitting 20 feet away. What happened? Emma asked gently. Why did you stay away so long? David was quiet for a moment, staring down at his hands. I came back from my last deployment different, angry, broken. We fought about everything, my drinking, my nightmares, my inability to talk about what I'd seen over there. I said terrible things to her, things I can never take back. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I told her she was better off without me, that I was just like my father, destined to leave her alone. It was the cruelest thing I could have said, and I knew it when I said it. Emma felt tears prick her eyes. She understood the weight of words that couldn't be taken back, the way shame could keep you running long after you wanted to come home. She keeps your booth empty every Tuesday, Emma said softly. Table 6 by the window. She never says why, but I know she's waiting for you. David closed his eyes, pain flickering across his features. I don't know if she can forgive me. I don't know if I deserve forgiveness. Maybe, Emma said carefully. Forgiveness isn't about deserving it. Maybe it's about being brave enough to accept it. She thought about her own life, her own fears of taking up too much space, of being too much trouble. Maybe they were both afraid of the same thing, that they were unworthy of love, undeserving of home. She's in the kitchen, Emma continued. If you want to see her, I could... No, David said quickly. Not yet. I need to think about what I want to say. Emma nodded, understanding. Some conversations required more courage than others. David left that afternoon without seeing his mother, but not before pressing a $20 bill into Emma's hand for a meal that had cost $12. For your kindness, he said simply, and thank you for defending me. It's been a long time since someone stood up for me. Emma watched him go, the handkerchief still tucked in her apron pocket, wondering if she'd just witnessed something important or something tragic. In her small apartment that night, she held the soft cotton square and thought about second chances, about the courage it took to come home, and about the mysterious ways that wrong tables sometimes led to exactly the right place. Emma Chen had learned early that children in the foster care system came in 2 varieties, the ones who fought against every placement, and the ones who made themselves so small and helpful that maybe, just maybe, they'd be allowed to stay. Emma had always been the second type. At 3 years old, when her grandmother died and left her with no other family, Emma had been placed with the Johnsons, a kind, elderly couple who smelled like vanilla cookies and let her sleep with a stuffed rabbit named Buttons. The Johnsons had wanted to adopt her. Emma learned years later, but Mr. Johnson's heart attack when she was 5 changed everything. Mrs. Johnson, suddenly alone and overwhelmed, made the hardest decision of her life and called social services. Emma remembered packing her few belongings in a paper grocery bag, Buttons tucked safely under her arm, while Mrs. Johnson cried and promised it wasn't Emma's fault. The Patterson family came next. 3 older children who viewed Emma as an unwelcome intrusion into their established hierarchy. She lasted 18 months there, perfecting the art of being invisible, doing her chores without being asked, never complaining when Jenny Patterson borrowed her toys and never returned them. Emma left the Pattersons when their youngest son started high school, and they decided they no longer wanted to foster children. 5 more placements followed before Emma aged out of the system at 18. The Millers, who ran their home like a military operation. The Garcias, whose own teenage daughter resented sharing her room with a foster kid. The Thompsons, who were kind but overwhelmed by their own financial struggles. Each placement taught Emma the same lesson: be useful, be quiet, be grateful, and never expect permanence. By the time Emma started working at Rosewood Family Restaurant 3 years ago, she'd mastered the art of reading people's needs before they voiced them. It was a survival skill learned in homes where anticipating mood swings could mean the difference between a peaceful evening and chaos. She could tell when Patricia was worried about money by the way she reorganized the supply closet. She knew when the cook, Miguel, was missing his family in Mexico because he'd hum old songs under his breath while prepping vegetables. Emma's apartment was a studio above the dry cleaner on Colfax Avenue, furnished with pieces she'd collected. From thrift stores and sidewalk finds, the walls were painted an off-white that she'd never bothered to change, and the only personal touch was a small shelf holding 7 books she'd managed to keep through all her moves. She owned exactly 3 plates, 2 cups, 1 bowl, and a set of silverware that had belonged to Mrs. Johnson, the only tangible connection to the closest thing to a mother she'd ever known. The morning after David Rosewood's visit, Emma woke with an unusual restlessness. She'd dreamed of the photograph behind the restaurant's register, but in her dream, the teenage boy in the picture had David's weary eyes and careful posture. She'd woken wondering if she should tell Patricia about her son's visit, and whether keeping the secret made her complicit in their ongoing separation. Emma arrived at Rosewood 45 minutes early, even earlier than usual, finding the restaurant dark and silent. She let herself in through the back entrance, moving through the familiar routine of turning on lights and starting the coffee machines. The photograph behind the register seemed to watch her as she worked, Patricia's younger self, smiling beside her husband and son, frozen in a moment before grief and misunderstanding had fractured their family. Patricia arrived 20 minutes later, looking more tired than usual. She moved slowly through her morning preparations, pausing occasionally to rest her hand on the counter in a way that made Emma worry about her health. At 78, Patricia had been talking more often about finding someone to take over. The restaurant, though she never seemed serious about actually retiring. "You're here early even for you," Patricia observed, checking the coffee temperature. "Everything all right, sweetheart?" Emma hesitated, David's face flashing in her mind. "Just couldn't sleep. Thought I'd get a head start on the day." Patricia studied her with the penetrating gaze that made Emma feel both seen and slightly uncomfortable. After 3 years of working together, Patricia had developed an uncanny ability to read Emma's moods, often knowing when something was troubling her before Emma recognized it herself. The morning rush brought the usual crowd, Mrs. Rodriguez with her twins, who were now old enough to sit still for nearly 10 minutes at a time. Dr. Martinez grabbing his coffee to go, dark circles under his eyes suggesting another long night at the clinic. Mr. Davidson settling into booth 3 with his newspaper and wheat toast, preparing for another day at the hardware store that was barely hanging on against the big box competition moving into the neighborhood. Emma moved through her routine with practiced efficiency, but her mind kept wandering to David Rosewood's careful posture, the way he'd helped her with the broken glass, the pain in his voice when he'd spoken about his mother. She found herself glancing at table 12 throughout the morning, half expecting to see him there again, though she wasn't sure if his return would be a blessing or a complication. Around 10 o'clock, the breakfast crowd thinned enough for Patricia to emerge from the kitchen with a fresh pot of coffee. She made her usual rounds, chatting with regulars, asking about their families, their jobs, their lives outside the restaurant walls. Emma watched Patricia's genuine interest in each customer's story, the way she remembered details from previous conversations, how she created a sense of community in a neighborhood that was rapidly changing around them. Mrs. Rodriguez, how did Sophia's dance recital go? Patricia asked, refilling the young mother's coffee cup. Oh, she was wonderful, Mrs. Rodriguez beamed. A little butterfly in the spring show. She asked me to invite you to the next one. I wouldn't miss it, Patricia replied warmly. Tell Sophia. I'll be in the front row, cheering louder than anyone. These small interactions were what made Rosewood more than just a restaurant. Patricia had created a surrogate family for people who needed one, a place where everyone's story mattered, where celebrations were shared and sorrows were softened by community support. Emma understood this instinctively, having spent most of her life searching for exactly this kind of belonging. When the lunch prep began, Emma found herself working alongside Patricia in the kitchen, chopping vegetables and preparing salads. They worked in comfortable silence, a rhythm developed over 3 years of shared shifts. Patricia moved more slowly than she used to, Emma noticed, taking frequent breaks and occasionally wincing when she thought no one was looking. Patricia, Emma said carefully, are you feeling all right? You seem tired lately. Patricia paused in her chopping, considering her response. Just getting older, sweetheart. Some mornings my bones remind me that I'm not 30 anymore. Emma wanted to push further, to ask about the doctor's visits she'd overheard Patricia scheduling, about the medication bottles that had appeared in Patricia's purse. But she'd learned long ago not to pry into things people weren't ready to share. Still, worry gnawed at her as she watched Patricia struggle with tasks that had once been effortless. The lunch crowd was lighter than usual, mostly regulars, and a few new faces drawn in by the warm atmosphere and reasonable prices. Emma served table after table, her movements automatic while her mind wrestled with the secret she was keeping. David's presence yesterday had shifted something in the restaurant's atmosphere, an invisible tension that only she seemed to feel. Around 2:00, Emma was wiping down tables when she noticed Patricia standing perfectly still behind the register, staring at something in her hands. Emma approached quietly, seeing that Patricia held the daily receipts, but her attention was focused on something else entirely. Tucked between the papers was David's $20 bill, the one he'd left for his $12 meal. Patricia, Emma said softly. Patricia looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. This $20 bill, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. See how it's folded? Emma looked closer, noticing that the bill was creased in a specific pattern, folded into a small triangle with one corner tucked under. It looked deliberate, purposeful. Michael used to fold his allowance money exactly like this, Patricia continued, her fingers tracing the creases. I taught him when he was 8 years old, told him it would help him save better if his money looked special. He did it with every bill until the day he left for the army. Emma's heart began racing. David had left the money that way deliberately, a message hidden in plain sight, a way of letting his mother know he'd been there without having to face her directly. Maybe it's just coincidence, Emma said weakly, though she could see in Patricia's face that she didn't believe it any more than Emma did. Patricia shook her head slowly. Yesterday, someone ordered scrambled eggs, wheat toast, and hash browns. That was always Michael's favorite breakfast. I made it 100 times when he was growing up, and he ordered it every time he came home on leave. The weight of the secret pressed against Emma's chest. She watched Patricia's face cycle through emotions, hope, fear, longing, and something that looked like desperate need to believe what her heart was telling her. Who paid this check? Patricia asked, though Emma could tell she already suspected the answer. Emma felt trapped between loyalty to David's privacy and Patricia's obvious pain. She thought about David's words the day before, his fear that his mother might not forgive him, his shame over the things he'd said before leaving. She thought about Patricia's 8 years of waiting, of keeping his booth empty every Tuesday, of the way she still set aside a piece of pie on his birthday even, though he never came. "Table 12, Emma said finally. "A man named David." Patricia's hand flew to her chest and she sank onto the stool behind the register. "David," she whispered. "David Michael. That's what the hospital called him when he was born, before we settled on Michael." Emma knelt beside Patricia's stool, alarmed by how pale she'd become. "Are you okay? Do you need to sit down properly?" "He was here," Patricia said, more to herself than to Emma. "My son was here, in my restaurant, and I didn't even know it." "He wanted to see you," Emma said gently. "But he was scared. He thinks you might not forgive him for the things he said before he left." Patricia looked at Emma sharply. "You talked to him. You knew who he was." Emma nodded, guilt washing over her. "He told me yesterday, after Mrs. Henderson was rude to him. I wanted to tell you, but he asked me not to. He said he needed time to figure out what to say." Patricia stood abruptly, pacing behind the counter. 8 years, she said, her voice breaking. 8 years I've wondered if he was alive, if he was hurt, if he needed help. 8 years of keeping his room exactly the way he left it, of cooking his favorite meals on his birthday, of hoping every time the phone rang that it might be him. Emma watched Patricia's anguish, understanding for the first time the depth of a mother's love and the terrible weight of not knowing. In all her foster placements, she'd never experienced this kind of fierce, enduring attachment. The closest she'd come was Mrs. Johnson's tears when social services took her away, but even that had been tinged with relief at the burden being lifted. "He's different now," Emma said carefully. "Older, sadder. He served in Afghanistan, and I think he's carrying a lot of pain from that. He told me he said cruel things to you before he left, things he regrets." "I don't care what he said," Patricia replied fiercely. "He's my son, my only child. There's nothing he could say that would make me stop loving him, stop wanting him to come home." The afternoon sun slanted through the restaurant windows, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air. Emma thought about families that stayed together through everything, about the kind of love that endured years of separation and hurt. It was foreign to her experience, but beautiful in its steadfastness. "What if he comes back?" Emma asked. Patricia wiped her eyes with her apron. "Then I'll be ready for him. And if he doesn't, at least I know he's alive. At least I know he's been thinking about home." The evening shift brought new challenges. Patricia seemed distracted, jumping every time. The door chime sounded, her eyes scanning each new customer's face with desperate hope. Emma found herself doing the same, watching for David's familiar posture, his careful way of surveying the room before settling into a seat. By closing time, David hadn't returned. Patricia's disappointment was palpable as she turned off the lights and locked the front door. Emma stayed to help with the final cleanup, sweeping floors and washing dishes, while Patricia counted the register with unusual care, examining each bill as if it might contain another hidden message. "He might come back tomorrow," Emma offered as they prepared to leave. Patricia nodded, though her expression suggested she was trying not to hope too hard. "Maybe. Or maybe he needs more time. I waited 8 years. I can wait a little longer." As Emma walked home through the quiet Denver streets, she thought about the different kinds of families she'd observed. The foster families who'd taken her, in out of duty or for the monthly payments. Patricia and Michael, separated by pride and pain, but connected by unbreakable bonds. Her own situation, a young woman with no family at all, building relationships carefully and always prepared for them to end. In her small apartment, Emma sat on her second-hand couch and pulled David's handkerchief from her apron pocket. She'd forgotten to return it, and now it felt like a physical connection to the drama unfolding at Rosewood. The soft cotton was expensive, she realized, much nicer than anything she owned. David might have changed his name and his life, but he'd done well for himself financially. Emma thought about the moment when David had knelt beside her to help with the broken glass, the gentle competence with which he'd treated her small injury. There had been something in his manner that suggested medical training, or at least extensive experience with emergencies. She wondered what his life had been like in the 8 years since leaving Denver, what had shaped him into the careful, watchful man who'd sat at table 12. The next morning, Emma woke before her alarm, anxiety and anticipation creating a restless energy she couldn't shake. She dressed quickly and arrived at Rosewood to find Patricia already there, moving through her preparations with unusual intensity. The restaurant gleamed from extra attention, every surface polished, every detail perfect. "You're hoping he'll and come back today," Emma observed. Patricia looked up from arranging fresh flowers on each table, a touch she usually saved for special occasions. "A mother can hope, can't she?" Emma nodded, understanding that hope was sometimes all people had to sustain them through the waiting. She thought about her own small hopes over the years, that a foster family might want to keep her, that she might find a place where she truly belonged, that someday she might matter enough to someone for them to fight to keep her in their life. As the breakfast rush began, both women found themselves hyper-aware of every customer who entered. Each time the door chime sounded, their eyes would dart toward the entrance, searching for the familiar figure who might or might not return. The day stretched ahead of them, full of possibility and disappointment in equal measure, while somewhere in Denver, a son wrestled with the courage needed to come home. The third day arrived with an unexpected chill, October weather that made Denver feel more like November. Emma walked to work through streets slick with overnight frost, her breath visible in small puffs as she navigated the familiar 3 blocks from her apartment to Rosewood. The city felt different in the early morning darkness, quieter and more intimate, as if it belonged only to the people who rose before dawn to keep the world running. Patricia was already at the restaurant when Emma arrived, but something had changed. The nervous energy from the previous day had been replaced by a determined calm, as if she'd made peace with uncertainty during the sleepless hours between midnight and morning. She moved through her preparations with her usual efficiency, but Emma noticed the way her eyes still flicked toward the windows whenever movement caught her attention. "Good morning, sweetheart," Patricia said, her voice carrying forced cheerfulness. "Coffee's already brewing. I thought we'd try that new Colombian blend with the breakfast crowd today." Emma nodded, recognizing the attempt at normalcy. She'd learned to read the subtle ways people tried to manage their own emotions, the small rituals and distractions that helped them cope with waiting. Patricia was channeling her anxiety into perfectionism, making everything exactly right in case her son decided to come home. The morning preparations took on a ritualistic quality. Patricia arranged the daily specials board with unusual care, writing each item in perfect script. Emma found herself polishing the coffee machine twice, ensuring that every surface reflected the warm overhead lights. They were both performing their roles with extra precision, as if excellence might somehow influence the outcome they both hoped for. Miguel arrived 20 minutes later, stamping his feet against the cold as he entered through the back door. The cook had worked at Rosewood for 7 years, long enough to have known Michael before his final departure. Emma had heard stories about the teenage boy who used to help in the kitchen during summer breaks, learning to flip pancakes and perfect his mother's secret recipe for hash browns. "Cold one today," Miguel announced, hanging his jacket on the hook by the prep station. "Weather's supposed to break by afternoon, though. Maybe bring some of those fall tourists back through." Patricia nodded absently, her attention focused on arranging silverware with mathematical precision. Miguel caught Emma's eye and raised his eyebrows questioningly. Emma shook her head slightly, a silent message that Patricia was having one of her days when everything needed to be perfect. The breakfast rush began with familiar faces seeking warmth and caffeine. Mrs. Rodriguez arrived with her twins bundled in matching blue coats, their cheeks pink from the cold walk. Dr. Martinez hurried in for his usual coffee to go, mentioning that the weather always brought more patients to the clinic with seasonal ailments. Mr. Davidson settled into booth 3, with extra appreciation for the restaurant's warmth, spreading his newspaper carefully and ordering oatmeal instead of his usual toast. Emma moved between tables with practiced grace, but part of her attention remained focused on the entrance. Each time the door opened, she felt a small spike of anticipation, wondering if this would be the moment David decided to face his past. The restaurant filled with the comforting sounds of morning conversation, clinking dishes, and the steady rhythm of the coffee machine, but underneath it all was an undercurrent of expectation. Around 9:30, a new customer entered that made Emma look twice. He was roughly David's age, with similar dark hair and the same careful way of surveying the room before choosing a seat. For a moment, Emma's heart jumped, but as he approached the counter, she realized it wasn't David at all, just another customer, another person seeking breakfast and warmth on a cold October morning. "Table for one," the man said, smiling politely. "Somewhere quiet, if you have it." Emma seated him at table 8, away from the main flow of traffic. As she handed him a menu, she noticed his hands, scarred across the knuckles in a way that suggested either manual labor or military service. The observation made her think of David again, wondering what his hands might reveal about the life he'd built in 8 years of exile from his family. The new customer ordered coffee and pancakes, settling in with a paperback book that looked well read. Emma found herself studying him peripherally as she worked, noting the way he held himself with familiar alertness. There was something about veterans, she'd begun to realize, a particular way of occupying space that suggested they'd learned to be ready for anything. Patricia emerged from the kitchen carrying a fresh pot of coffee, her movement still carrying yesterday's tension despite her attempts at normalcy. She made her rounds among the regular customers, chatting about the weather and local news, but Emma could see the distraction in her eyes. Every conversation was shortened, every interaction efficient rather than leisurely. "Patricia seems off." "Today," Mrs. Rodriguez observed quietly as Emma refilled her coffee cup. "Is everything all right?" Emma glanced toward Patricia, who was discussing the merits of different winter coats with Mr. Davidson. "Just a lot on her mind lately. The restaurant business keeps her busy." Mrs. Rodriguez nodded, accepting the explanation while clearly sensing there was more to the story. After 3 years of regular visits, the customers had developed relationships with both Patricia and Emma that went beyond simple service. They noticed mood changes, health concerns, and the small dramas that played out in the restaurant's warm confines. Around 10:15, the door chimed again, and Emma looked up to see a familiar figure silhouetted against the bright morning light. David Rosewood stepped inside, pausing to let his eyes adjust to the restaurant's dimmer interior. He wore a different jacket today, brown leather instead of navy, but the same careful posture, the same way of cataloguing the room's occupants before moving forward. Emma felt her pulse quicken as David's gaze found hers across the dining room. He nodded slightly, a greeting that carried acknowledgement of their shared secret. Patricia was in the kitchen, unaware that her son had returned, giving David a few moments to settle himself before the inevitable confrontation. "Table 12 again?" Emma asked as she approached him, though she already knew the answer. "If it's available," David replied, his voice carrying the same rough quality she remembered. "I seem to have developed an attachment to that particular spot." Emma led him to the booth by the window, noting how his gaze lingered on the photograph behind the register as they passed. She wondered what it felt like to see yourself as a teenager, frozen in a moment before everything changed, displayed in the restaurant your mother had built into her life's work. "Coffee?" Emma asked, though she was already reaching for the pot. Please. David settled into the booth, positioning himself to watch both the kitchen and the front entrance. And maybe some breakfast. I didn't eat much yesterday. Emma poured his coffee, noticing the slight tremor in his hands as he wrapped them around the warm mug. Nervousness, she realized, or perhaps the lingering effects of whatever had kept him away for 8 years. She'd seen enough trauma responses in the foster care system to recognize someone carrying invisible burdens. The usual, she asked. Scrambled. Eggs, wheat toast, hash browns. David looked surprised. You remember? I remember everything, Emma said simply, then caught herself at the admission's intimacy. I mean, I pay attention to what customers order. It's part of the job. David studied her face with an intensity that made her slightly uncomfortable. Is it just part of the job? The way you defended me against that woman yesterday, the kindness you've shown, is that just professional service? Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks. Everyone deserves to be treated with respect, especially people who've served their country. How did you know I was military? The way you sit, how you watch the room. My friend Jake from high school was Army. He came back from Iraq with the same careful awareness. David nodded slowly. 3 tours in Afghanistan. Came back with more baggage than I knew how to carry. Emma wanted to ask more questions, to understand the experiences that had shaped him into this guarded, thoughtful man. But the kitchen door opened, and Patricia emerged, carrying a tray of fresh-baked muffins for the display case. Emma felt the moment shift, the weight of anticipation settling over the dining room like a held breath. Patricia moved toward the front counter, her back to table 12. She arranged the muffins with characteristic care, unaware that her son sat less than 20 feet away, watching her with an expression of profound longing mixed with terror. Emma found herself frozen between them, knowing that the next few minutes would change everything for both of them. David sat perfectly still, his coffee cooling in his hands as he studied his mother's movements. Patricia had aged in the 8 years since he'd left, her silver hair slightly thinner, her movements more deliberate. But her essential nature remained unchanged, the careful attention to detail, the pride she took in her work, the graceful efficiency that had always characterized her approach to running the restaurant. She looks smaller, David said quietly, his voice barely audible across the table. Emma glanced between mother and son, seeing them both clearly for the first time, as separate people carrying their own pain. Patricia, who had spent 8 years wondering if her only child was alive, maintaining hope through small rituals and endless waiting. David, who had clearly prospered in his exile, but carried guilt and fear that kept him from the reconciliation. He obviously wanted. She's been worried about you, Emma said carefully, every day for 8 years. David closed his eyes briefly. I never meant for it to be so long. The first year I was angry, the second year I was ashamed. By the 3rd year it felt too late to come back, like too much time had passed to bridge the gap. What changed? Emma asked. What brought you here now? David was quiet for a long moment, watching Patricia as she finished arranging the muffins and began wiping down the counter with characteristic thoroughness. I got diagnosed with cancer 6 months ago. Lung cancer, probably from burn pit exposure overseas. The treatment went well, and I'm in remission now, but it made me realize that some conversations can't wait forever. The words hit Emma like a physical blow. Cancer. The careful way David moved, the slight tremor in his hands, the weight loss she could see now that she looked more closely. It all made terrible sense. He'd come home because he might not have unlimited time to make things right. Does she need to know? Emma asked. About the cancer? I don't know, David admitted. I don't want her to forgive me just because I was sick. I want her to forgive me because she chooses to, because she wants me in her life, not because she feels obligated. Emma understood the distinction, though she wasn't sure Patricia would see it the same way. Mothers, in her limited experience, seemed to operate on different principles than the rest of the world when it came to their children. Patricia finished her work at the counter and turned toward the dining room, beginning her usual mid-morning rounds among the customers. She started with table 3, chatting with Mr. Davidson about the weather forecast, then table 5, where a young couple was splitting a breakfast special. She moved with practiced efficiency, but Emma could see the underlying tension in her posture, the way her eyes continued to scan the room, even during conversations. Table 10 came next, then table 9. Patricia was working her way systematically toward the back of the restaurant, toward table 12, where her son sat waiting with 8 years of unspoken words weighing between them. Emma felt her own tension ratcheting higher with each table. Patricia approached, knowing that the conversation she was about to witness would reshape both their lives. David seemed to sense the approaching moment as well. He straightened in his seat, his hands finding steadier positions on the table. The careful military bearing became more pronounced, as if he was drawing on old training to face this personal battle. Emma thought about the courage it must have taken for him to walk through the restaurant's front door, to sit in full view, knowing that discovery was inevitable. Patricia reached table 11, chatting briefly with the customer who was reading. And while eating pancakes, Emma realized she was holding her breath, watching two people she cared about approach a moment that had been 8 years in the making. Whatever happened next would echo through the restaurant's warm confines for years to come. Another layer of story added to the place Patricia had built as a sanctuary for families. The morning light shifted through the windows, casting long shadows across the dining room floor. In the kitchen, Miguel continued his prep work, unaware of the drama unfolding among the tables. The other customers ate their breakfasts and drank their coffee, surrounded by the comfortable atmosphere Patricia had cultivated, while mother and son prepared to face each other across a chasm of time and hurt and stubborn love that had never really died. 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of change that transformed the rhythm of life at Rosewood Family Restaurant. David had moved back to Denver, renting a small apartment 6 blocks from the restaurant, while he helped Patricia navigate the complexities of bringing him into the business as a partner. The legal paperwork alone seemed endless. Incorporation documents, partnership agreements, insurance modifications, and licensing updates that required multiple trips to various government offices. Emma watched the transformation with fascination and growing unease. David threw himself into learning the business with the same methodical intensity she imagined he'd once applied to military operations. He arrived each morning before opening to review inventory, studied supplier contracts during slow periods, and spent evenings poring over financial statements that revealed both the restaurant's strengths and its vulnerabilities. "The profit margins are tighter than I expected," David confided to Emma during a quiet Tuesday afternoon. "Mom's been essentially subsidizing some customers' meals for years, charging below cost for certain items because she knows people in the neighborhood struggle financially." Emma nodded, unsurprised by this revelation. She'd noticed Patricia's quiet generosity, the way she never charged Mrs. Rodriguez for her twins' hot chocolate, how Mr. Davidson's coffee refills seemed infinite despite the posted policy, the mysterious way certain customers' checks always came out lower than the menu prices suggested. "That's who she is," Emma replied. "This place isn't just a business to her, it's a community service." David studied the financial records spread across table 12, his expression thoughtful. "I understand the impulse, but we need to find a sustainable way to do it. The restaurant can't help anyone if it goes under." The business discussions revealed a side of David that Emma hadn't seen before. He possessed a sharp analytical mind that could dissect complex problems and identify practical solutions. His military experience had taught him logistics and planning, while his years away had apparently included business education that complemented his natural intelligence. "Where did you learn all this?" Emma asked as she watched him create detailed spreadsheets tracking food costs and customer traffic patterns. "Afghanistan, actually," David replied, not looking up from his laptop. "Started as a supply sergeant, ended up helping coordinate reconstruction projects. You learn quickly how to make resources stretch when lives depend on efficiency." Emma thought about the skills that trauma could teach, the unexpected expertise that emerged from surviving difficult circumstances. David's years away had given him tools that proved valuable in civilian life, even though she suspected those same experiences had cost him in other ways. Patricia observed her son's immersion in the business with a mixture of pride and concern. She seemed pleased by his competence and dedication, but Emma noticed worried glances when David worked late into the evening or arrived at the restaurant with dark circles under his eyes that suggested sleepless nights. "He's pushing himself too hard," Patricia confided to Emma during a quiet morning prep session. "I wanted him to come home and heal, not take on another burden." "Maybe this is how he heals," Emma suggested carefully. "Some people need purpose to feel whole again." Patricia considered this, her hands stilling on the vegetables she was chopping. "When his father died, I threw myself into expanding the restaurant's hours and menu. Everyone said I was working too hard, but staying busy was the only thing that kept me from falling apart completely." Emma understood both perspectives. She'd seen how purposeful work could provide structure and meaning when everything else felt chaotic or uncertain, but she'd also observed David closely enough to notice the signs of someone running from something internal that couldn't be outpaced through external activity. The first major challenge came when their primary food supplier announced a significant price increase that would force difficult decisions about menu pricing. David spent an entire evening calculating different scenarios, trying to balance customer affordability with business sustainability. "We could absorb the increase for 6 months, he explained to Patricia and Emma, spreading financial projections across the dining room table after closing. "But that would eliminate our emergency reserve fund, or we could raise prices by 15% across the board, which would probably drive away the customers who need us most." Patricia looked overwhelmed by the numbers, her usual decisiveness replaced by uncertainty. For 25 years, she'd made business decisions based on intuition and community need. The analytical approach David brought felt foreign, even when she recognized its necessity. "What would you recommend?" Patricia asked her son. David hesitated, clearly aware that his answer would affect real people's lives. "A hybrid approach, modest price increases on items that middle-class customers typically order, subsidized by finding a new supplier for basic ingredients. I've been researching local farms that might offer better prices for direct purchasing." Emma found herself impressed by David's thoughtful approach to balancing profit with purpose. He wasn't suggesting they abandon Patricia's community mission, but rather find smarter ways to sustain it. The solution reflected both business acumen and genuine care for the restaurant's role in the neighborhood. The supplier transition required days of phone calls, site visits, and quality testing that David handled with military precision. Emma accompanied him to several local farms, watching him negotiate contracts with the same careful attention to detail he applied to everything else. The farmers responded well to his direct communication style and obvious commitment to quality. "Your son knows what he's doing," commented Martha Gonzalez, whose family farm would become their new produce supplier. "It's rare to meet someone who understands both numbers and people." During these business development trips, Emma began to see Denver through David's eyes. He pointed out changes in neighborhoods he'd known as a teenager, new developments replacing familiar landmarks, demographic shifts that reflected broader economic trends. His observations revealed someone who'd thought deeply about the forces reshaping American communities. "This used to be all working-class families," David said, as they drove through a neighborhood now dotted with trendy boutiques and expensive condos. "My friend Tony lived over there in that house that's now worth $500,000. His dad worked at the steel plant until it closed in 2008. Emma heard the loss in his voice, recognition that the Denver he'd returned to wasn't quite the home he'd left behind. She wondered if this was part of what made military veterans' transitions so difficult. Coming back to find that home had continued changing without them. The new supplier relationships began paying dividends within 2 weeks. Food quality improved while costs decreased, allowing Patricia to maintain her informal policy of helping struggling customers without jeopardizing the restaurant's financial stability. David's systematic approach was working, but Emma noticed the toll it was taking on him personally. He worked 12-hour days, arrived early and stayed late, took business calls during his lunch breaks. His initial enthusiasm for rejoining the restaurant was evolving into something that looked more like obsession. Emma recognized the pattern from her own tendency to overperform when she feared losing something important. "You need to take a day off," Emma told him during a particularly intense week of inventory management and staff scheduling. "I'm fine," David replied automatically, not looking up from the employee handbook he was revising. "There's too much to do right now." "There's always too much to do," Emma countered. "That's the nature of restaurant work. But burning yourself out won't help anyone." David finally looked at her, and Emma saw exhaustion in his eyes that went deeper than simple overwork. "I have 8 years to make up for. 8 years of not being here when Mom needed help." Emma understood then that David's intense focus on the business wasn't just about professional competence. It was penance, his way of trying to balance the scales after years of absence. The recognition made her heart ache for him, knowing how impossible it was to retroactively earn forgiveness for time that couldn't be recovered. The breakthrough came during their 3rd week of partnership, when a kitchen equipment failure threatened to shut down lunch service on their busiest day. The main gas line to the stove developed a leak that required immediate professional repair, but the earliest a technician could arrive was the following morning. "We'll have to close for the day," Patricia said, looking defeated as she surveyed the disabled kitchen. David studied the situation with the same analytical intensity he applied to everything else. "What if we don't? Emma, how many customers typically order hot entrees versus sandwiches and salads during lunch?" Emma thought quickly through their usual lunch patterns. Maybe 60% hot food, 40% cold, but the hot food orders are higher profit. "Miguel," David called to their cook, "could you prepare cold lunch items using the backup equipment in the prep area? Sandwiches, salads, things that don't require the main stove?" Miguel nodded enthusiastically. "Si, absolutely. We make beautiful lunch without the big stove." What followed was a remarkable display of improvisation and teamwork. David quickly designed a modified menu featuring gourmet sandwiches, hearty salads, and cold soups that could be prepared using only the working equipment. Emma helped create new table tents explaining the situation and offering discounts to compensate for the limited options. Patricia worked the phones, calling regular customers to explain the situation and invite them to try something different. The lunch service became an adventure rather than a disaster. Customers embraced the makeshift menu with good humor, treating the equipment failure as an opportunity to try new combinations they might never have ordered otherwise. Several people commented that the crisis had brought out creativity they'd never seen from the restaurant before. "This turkey and avocado sandwich is incredible," Dr. Martinez commented during his usual lunch rush visit. "You should keep this on the regular menu." By closing time, they'd served nearly as many customers as a typical lunch service, with many expressing appreciation for the staff's resourcefulness and positive attitude. The crisis had transformed from a potential disaster into a testament to the restaurant's resilience and creativity. "That was amazing," Patricia said as they cleaned up after the successful lunch service. "I would have panicked and closed for the day. You turned it into something positive." David looked genuinely surprised by the praise. "We all did it together. I just suggested a different approach." Emma watched this exchange with growing understanding of David's value to the restaurant beyond his financial expertise. His military training had taught him to adapt quickly to unexpected challenges, to find solutions under pressure, and to maintain team morale when circumstances were difficult. These skills complemented Patricia's community focus and Emma's customer service instincts perfectly. The equipment repair the following morning went smoothly, but the crisis had revealed something important about their emerging partnership. They functioned well as a team, each contributing different strengths that combined into something more effective than any of them could achieve individually. "We should talk about making this official," Patricia said during their weekly business meeting. "The partnership, I mean. Getting the legal documents finalized and establishing clear roles for everyone." David nodded, pulling out the partnership agreement their lawyer had drafted. "I've been reviewing this, and I want to suggest some modifications. Specifically, I think Emma should be included as a third partner, not just an employee." Emma felt her heart stop. "What?" "You've been instrumental in every improvement we've made," David continued matter-of-factly. "You know the customers better than anyone, you understand the operational flow, and you've been essentially managing day-to-day operations for 3 years. This should be a 3-way partnership." Patricia smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze Emma's hand. "I've been thinking the same thing. Your family, Emma. This should reflect that reality." Emma stared at them both, struggling to process what they were offering. Partnership meant ownership, responsibility, and permanent belonging in a way she'd never experienced. It meant they valued her contributions enough to bet the restaurant's future on her continued involvement. "I don't have money to invest," Emma said quietly, the practical concerns overwhelming her emotional response. "Your investment is already here," David replied. 3 years of building relationships, understanding the business, proving your commitment. Sweat equity is just as valuable as cash, sometimes more so. The conversation continued for another hour, working through the details of profit sharing, decision-making authority, and long-term vision for Rosewood's future. Emma found herself included in planning discussions about expansion possibilities, menu development, and community outreach programs that would formalize the restaurant's role as a neighborhood anchor. As they finished the meeting, Emma realized that David's return had catalyzed changes she never could have anticipated. His presence hadn't just reunited him with Patricia, it had created opportunities for all of them to build something stronger and more sustainable than what had existed before. The partnership they were forming honored the restaurant's history while positioning it for a future that could weather the challenges of a changing neighborhood and economy. Walking home that evening, Emma reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just 3 weeks. She'd gone from being an employee grateful for steady work to being offered partnership in a business she'd helped build. More importantly, she'd discovered what it meant to be part of a family that chose to include her, that valued her contributions, and that trusted her with their shared future. The partnership documents were signed on a Thursday morning in November, with Denver's first snowfall creating a crystalline backdrop outside the restaurant's windows. Emma signed her name with trembling hands, still unable to fully believe that she was becoming a 1/3 owner of Rosewood Family Restaurant. The lawyer, a kind older woman named Chen, who had handled Patricia's business affairs for years, explained each clause with patience while snow accumulated on the windowsills. "Congratulations," Sarah said as she gathered the signed documents. "You're now officially business partners. I have to say, in 30 years of practice, I've rarely seen a partnership structure that feels this natural and well-balanced. Patricia beamed with pride as she shook hands with both Emma and David. It feels right, she said simply. Like this is how it was always meant to be. Emma walked through the rest of that day in a dreamlike state, performing her usual duties, while processing the profound shift in her identity. She was no longer just Emma Chen, the foster kid who served coffee and cleared tables. She was Emma Chen, business owner, decision-maker, someone whose opinions mattered in shaping the restaurant's future. The first major decision they faced as partners came 2 days later, when a developer approached them with an offer to buy the building that housed Rosewood. The man arrived during the lunch rush, wearing an expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase that looked more costly than Emma's monthly rent. "I represent Pinnacle Development Group," he announced to Patricia, sliding a business card across the counter. "We're interested in purchasing this property for a mixed-use development project. The offer is quite generous." Patricia accepted the card with visible reluctance. "We're not looking to sell." "Perhaps you should review the numbers before making that decision," the developer replied smoothly. "We're prepared to offer well above market value, plus assistance with relocation costs if you choose to re-establish your business elsewhere." Emma watched the exchange from across the dining room, noting how several regular customers had stopped eating to listen. Mr. Davidson looked particularly concerned, his newspaper forgotten as he focused on the conversation. Mrs. Rodriguez clutched, her coffee cup tighter, as if preparing for bad news. "I'll discuss it with my partners," Patricia said finally, her voice carefully neutral. The developer's eyebrows rose slightly at the mention of partners. "Of course. Here's the formal proposal. We hope to hear from you within the week." After he left, the restaurant buzzed with nervous energy. Customers who had overheard the conversation began asking questions about the restaurant's future, their concern evident in every query. Emma realized that Rosewood's role in the community was even more significant than she'd understood. For many of these people, the restaurant wasn't just a place to eat. It was a constant in their rapidly changing neighborhood. That evening, the three partners gathered around table 12 to review the developer's proposal. The offer was indeed generous, enough money to set all of them up comfortably for years. For Emma, who had never owned anything of value, the sum represented financial security beyond her wildest dreams. "It's a lot of money," David said quietly, studying the documents. "It is," Patricia agreed, "more than I ever expected this place to be worth." Emma felt the weight of the decision pressing down on them. Accepting the offer would solve all their financial concerns and free them from the daily pressures of running a restaurant. But it would also mean the end of something irreplaceable, the destruction of a community anchor that had taken Patricia 25 years to build. "What do you think the neighborhood loses if we sell?" Emma asked, voicing the question that had been troubling her since the developer's visit. Patricia looked around the dining room, her gaze lingering on familiar details. The photographs on the walls, the worn but comfortable booths, the coffee machine that had served thousands of customers. "Over the years, a gathering place," she said finally. "Somewhere people can afford to bring their families, where they know they'll be welcomed regardless of their circumstances." David nodded slowly. "I've been researching Pinnacle Development. Their projects typically involve upscale retail and luxury housing. Whatever replaces this would serve a completely different demographic." Emma thought about Mrs. Rodriguez, struggling to afford breakfast for her twins, about Mr. Davidson finding community in his daily booth, about Dr. Martinez grabbing affordable coffee between treating patients who couldn't pay for medical care. The restaurant served people who were being priced out of other establishments as the neighborhood gentrified. "We could take the money and open somewhere else," David suggested. "Find a location in a neighborhood that needs what we provide." "Starting over is hard," Patricia replied, her voice heavy with the weight of experience. It took years to build the relationships we have here, to become part of the community's fabric, and I'm not sure I have the energy to do it again at my age." Emma understood Patricia's hesitation. At 78, she deserved to enjoy the fruits of her life's work rather than begin another exhausting building process. But Emma also saw the pain in Patricia's eyes at the thought of abandoning the community she'd served for so long. "What if we don't have to choose?" Emma said suddenly, an idea forming as she spoke. "What if we could find a way to stay here, while also planning for the future?" Both David and Patricia looked at her with interest. Emma felt a flutter of nervousness at being the center of attention, but pushed forward with her developing thoughts. "The developer wants this building for its location and potential, right? But what if the current use is actually part of what makes the location valuable? A established community gathering place that brings foot traffic and local loyalty." David's eyes sharpened with interest. "You're thinking about negotiating a different kind of deal?" "Maybe," Emma said, gaining confidence. "What if instead of selling outright, we explored options that let us stay while giving the developer what they need? Ground floor commercial space in their new building, or a long-term lease that protects our operations?" Patricia's face lit up with hope. "Is that possible?" "It's worth exploring," David said, his analytical mind already working through possibilities. "We'd need to understand exactly what they're planning, whether our continued presence fits their vision." The conversation continued late into the evening, with David sketching potential scenarios on napkins while Patricia shared stories about other local businesses that had successfully navigated development pressures. Emma found herself energized by the collaborative problem-solving, the way their different perspectives combined to generate creative solutions. The next morning brought unexpected support from the community. Word of the developer's visit had spread through the neighborhood's informal networks, and customers began arriving with concerns and offers of help. Mrs. Rodriguez brought a petition she'd started, already signed by 30 neighbors who wanted Rosewood to remain. Mr. Davidson mentioned his nephew, a lawyer who specialized in commercial real estate. Dr. Martinez offered to help organize community meetings if needed. "This place matters to people," Emma observed to David as they watched customers throughout the morning express their support. "More than I realized," David admitted. "Military bases have community centers that serve similar functions. Places where people gather, where relationships form, where support networks develop. But those are intentionally designed for that purpose. What Mom built here happened organically." Emma thought about the foster care system's group homes, where children were housed together but rarely formed genuine connections. Community couldn't be manufactured through proximity alone. It required someone like Patricia, who deliberately created space for relationships to flourish. The breakthrough came when David suggested they request a meeting with Pinnacle Development to explore alternative arrangements. Rather than simply accepting or rejecting their offer, they would present their own vision for how Rosewood could fit into the developer's plans. "We need to position ourselves as an asset rather than an obstacle," David explained as they prepared for the meeting. "Show them how our presence could enhance their project rather than complicate it." Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Emma spent hours researching successful examples of community businesses that had thrived within new developments. She found case studies of restaurants that had become anchor tenants in mixed-use projects, drawing residents and visitors who supported other businesses in the complex. Patricia contributed her deep knowledge of the neighborhood's demographics and needs, helping them understand what kinds of services the incoming residents might want. Her 25 years of community involvement had given her insights that no market research could replicate. The meeting with Pinnacle Development took place the following Tuesday in their downtown offices. Emma felt intimidated by the sleek conference room and expensive suits, but David's military bearing and Patricia's quiet dignity gave her confidence. "We've reviewed your generous offer," David began, "and we appreciate the opportunity to be part of your vision for the neighborhood. We'd like to propose an alternative arrangement that could benefit both parties." The lead developer, a woman named Jennifer Walsh, leaned forward with interest. "We're listening." Emma found her voice as they presented their research and proposals. "Rosewood serves a demographic that would complement your target residents. Young professionals who want convenient, affordable dining options. Families who value community gathering spaces. The restaurant could serve as a bridge between long-time neighborhood residents and newcomers." Patricia added her perspective on the community's needs and the restaurant's role in meeting them. Her passion for the work was evident as she described the informal support networks that had developed around Rosewood, the way regular customers looked out for each other, the sense of belonging she'd tried to create. Jennifer Walsh listened thoughtfully, occasionally asking questions that suggested genuine interest rather than polite dismissal. "This is not what we typically consider," she said finally, "but it's intriguing. Would you be willing to work with our architects to explore how your operation could be integrated into our design?" The following weeks involved detailed discussions about space requirements, lease terms, and design modifications that would allow Rosewood to continue operating during and after construction. Emma found herself deep in conversations about square footage, parking requirements, and accessibility standards that challenged her to think about the restaurant in entirely new ways. David's business background proved invaluable during negotiations, helping them understand the financial implications of different arrangements while advocating for terms that would ensure Rosewood's long-term viability. His military experience with logistics and planning helped him grasp the construction timeline and its impact on their operations. Patricia's role evolved into something like community ambassador, helping Pinnacle Development understand the neighborhood's character and needs. Her relationships with longtime residents provided insights that informed the developer's broader planning process. The tentative agreement they reached exceeded Emma's most optimistic hopes. Rosewood would remain in operation during construction, then move into a larger ground floor space in the new building with a 20-year lease at below-market rates. The developer would fund renovations that would improve accessibility and efficiency while preserving the restaurant's essential character. "It's almost too good to be true," Emma confided to David as they reviewed the preliminary terms. "Good partnerships benefit everyone involved," David replied. "We're providing something they need: authentic community connection and local credibility. They're providing us with stability and improved facilities. When interests align, amazing things become possible." Emma thought about how dramatically her life had changed in just a few months. She'd gone from being an invisible waitress to being a business owner, helping negotiate complex real estate deals. More importantly, she discovered that she had valuable skills and insights that others respected and needed. The community responded to news of the agreement with celebration and relief. Customers who had feared losing their gathering place embraced the plan to preserve Rosewood while improving the neighborhood. The restaurant became a symbol of successful adaptation to change rather than victimization by forces beyond their control. As winter deepened around Denver, Emma felt a sense of accomplishment and anticipation that was entirely new to her. She was part of something larger than herself, something that mattered to people beyond her immediate circle. The partnership with David and Patricia had given her not just financial security, but purpose and belonging that filled needs she'd carried her entire life. The future held challenges and uncertainties, but for the first time, Emma faced them as part of a team that valued her contributions and trusted her judgment. The scared foster child, who had learned to make herself invisible, had become a confident business owner, helping shape her community's future. The renovations began in March, transforming Rosewood into a construction zone, while somehow maintaining its essential spirit. Emma had never imagined she would find herself wearing a hard hat and work boots, walking through dust-covered dining rooms with architects and contractors, but the partnership had thrust her into roles she'd never expected to fill. The temporary kitchen they'd set up in the back storage room was cramped and challenging, but it allowed them to continue serving their core customers throughout the construction process. David coordinated the renovation timeline with military precision, creating detailed schedules that tracked everything from electrical work to the delivery of new equipment. His background in logistics proved invaluable as he navigated the complex dance of contractors, inspectors, and suppliers, while ensuring minimal disruption to their daily operations. Emma watched him manage crisis after crisis with calm competence, wondering if this was how he'd handled emergencies during his deployments overseas. The new exhaust system installation is running 3 days behind, David reported during one of their morning meetings in the makeshift office they'd created in Patricia's apartment above the restaurant. But the flooring crew can start earlier than planned, so we might actually finish on schedule. Patricia listened to these updates with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. At 78, she was experiencing her first major renovation in 25 years of restaurant ownership, and the process both thrilled and exhausted her. Emma noticed how Patricia relied increasingly on David's project management skills, while maintaining firm opinions about design choices that would affect the restaurant's atmosphere. "I don't care what the designer says about efficiency," Patricia declared when shown plans for a more streamlined counter layout. "The coffee machine needs to be positioned where I can see the entire dining room. How else will I know when Mrs. Rodriguez needs a refill or when Mr. Davidson looks lonely?" Emma understood Patricia's concern about preserving the personal connections that made Rosewood special. The new space would be larger and more modern, but it needed to retain the intimate feeling that encouraged customers to linger and build relationships with staff and each other. Every design decision required balancing efficiency with warmth, functionality with character. The customer base rallied around the restaurant during the renovation chaos, demonstrating loyalty that surprised even Emma with its depth and consistency. Regular customers adapted to reduced seating, limited menu options, and the constant background noise of construction without complaint. Many offered to help with small tasks, bringing their own tools to assist with painting or furniture moving. "This is what community looks like," observed Dr. Martinez as he helped David move tables one Saturday morning. "People investing in something they value, not just consuming it." Emma found herself documenting the renovation process through photographs and journal entries, creating a record of the transformation for the restaurant's growing archive. She'd started the project simply to track progress, but it evolved into something more meaningful as she captured moments of collaboration between customers, staff, and contractors that revealed the genuine affection people felt for Rosewood. 1. Particularly powerful photograph showed Mrs. Rodriguez's twins helping Miguel paint the new children's corner, their small hands leaving colorful prints on the wall that Patricia insisted they preserve as part of the permanent decoration. Another captured Mr. Davidson teaching a young contractor how to repair a vintage booth, passing along skills from his hardware store experience. The renovation also revealed surprises about the building's history that deepened everyone's appreciation for its significance. When workers removed old paneling from the back wall, they discovered hand-painted murals from the 1940s depicting Denver's mountain landscape. A local artist volunteered to restore the murals as part of the renovation, adding historical character that complemented the restaurant's community mission. "This building has stories we never knew," Patricia marveled as she examined the restored artwork. "It makes me wonder about all the families who gathered here before we arrived, all the conversations and connections that happened in this space." Emma thought about the layers of history embedded in places like Rosewood, how spaces accumulate meaning through the lives that intersect within them. Her own connection to the restaurant was recent compared to these older stories, but it felt equally significant in shaping her understanding of home and belonging. The construction process also brought David and Emma into closer collaboration than they'd experienced during the initial business partnership phase. They spent hours together, reviewing architectural plans, selecting equipment, and making decisions that would affect the restaurant's operations for years to come. Emma discovered that David valued her input on practical matters in ways that surprised her with their respect and consideration. "What do you think about this prep station layout?" David asked during one of their planning sessions, spreading blueprints across the dust-covered counter. "The designer likes it, but you're the one who'll be working with it every day." Emma studied the plans carefully, visualizing the workflow during busy periods. "The refrigeration is too far from the sandwich assembly area. We'd waste time and steps during lunch rush. Could we move it here instead?" David nodded, making notes on the blueprints. "Good catch. That's exactly the kind of operational insight we need." These collaborative moments helped Emma understand that her practical knowledge of restaurant operations was genuinely valuable, not just appreciated out of politeness. David's respect for her expertise felt different from Patricia's maternal affection, more professional and egalitarian, treating her as a true business partner rather than a beloved employee who'd been promoted. The partnership dynamics also revealed aspects of David's character that Emma found increasingly attractive. His calm competence during stressful situations, his thoughtful approach to problem-solving, and his genuine care for preserving what made Rosewood special demonstrated qualities she'd rarely encountered in her limited romantic experience. Emma had always assumed that her chaotic childhood and foster care history made her unsuitable for serious relationships. She dated occasionally, but never allowed connections to deepen, convinced that her lack of family background and emotional baggage would eventually drive partners away. But working closely with David suggested possibilities she'd never considered before. "You're good at this," David said one evening, as they reviewed contractor bids by lamplight in the temporary office. "The business side, I mean. You have instincts about operations and customer service that can't be taught." Emma felt warmth spread through her chest at his praise, but also familiar anxiety about expectations she might not be able to meet. "I'm just trying to be helpful." "It's more than that," David replied, looking up from the papers. "You understand this business in ways I'm still learning. Patricia was smart to want you as a partner." The conversation shifted to broader topics. David's experiences overseas, Emma's thoughts about the neighborhood's changes, their shared hopes for Rosewood's future. Emma found herself sharing stories about her foster care background that she'd never told anyone at the restaurant, trusting David with vulnerabilities she usually kept hidden. 18 different placements before I aged out," she explained, when David asked about her family history. "Some better than others, but none that felt permanent. This restaurant is the longest I've ever stayed anywhere." David listened without offering false comfort or meaningless platitudes, his attention focused and genuine. "Military life involves a lot of moving around too," he said finally. "Different reasons, but the feeling of never quite belonging anywhere is familiar." Emma appreciated his understanding without claiming equivalence between their experiences. David's childhood had been stable until his father's death and his mother's grief, while Emma's entire youth had been marked by impermanence and institutional care. but both of them understood what it meant to search for belonging and the relief of finally finding it. The renovation timeline accelerated during April as completion deadlines approached. Emma found herself working 12-hour days, splitting time between serving customers in the temporary setup and making final decisions about the new space. The physical exhaustion was offset by growing excitement as she watched their vision take shape in concrete and steel. The new dining room would seat 48 customers compared to 32 in the original space, with improved lighting and acoustics that would enhance conversation while maintaining the intimate atmosphere Patricia prized. The kitchen featured modern equipment that would improve efficiency and food safety while preserving Miguel's ability to prepare his specialties with traditional techniques. Emma's favorite addition was a community bulletin board where customers could post local announcements, share resources, and organize neighborhood activities. The idea had emerged from watching how naturally people used Rosewood as an informal information hub, leaving messages for each other and coordinating community projects over coffee and meals. It formalizes something that was already happening, Emma explained to David as they positioned the board near the entrance. Now people will know it's intentional, that we want the restaurant to serve as a community center. David smiled, adjusting the board's height for optimal visibility. You're thinking like a true business owner now, recognizing opportunities to enhance what customers value about coming here. The compliment carried weight because it came from someone whose judgment Emma had learned to trust. David's military background and business education gave him perspectives that complemented her intuitive understanding of customer service and community needs. Their partnership had evolved beyond simple collaboration into something that felt genuinely synergistic. Patricia observed their growing connection with obvious approval, occasionally making comments that suggested she hoped their professional partnership might develop into something more personal. Emma felt embarrassed by the attention, but also grateful for Patricia's maternal interest in her happiness and future. David, need someone who understands what this place means, Patricia confided one afternoon as they watched him coordinate the installation of new booth seating. And you need someone who sees your value and wants to build something lasting with you. Emma blushed at Patricia's directness, but didn't deny the accuracy of her observations. She had begun imagining a future that included David, not just as a business partner, but as someone she might build a life with. The possibility felt both thrilling and terrifying, representing the kind of permanent connection she'd always wanted but never believed she deserved. The grand reopening was scheduled for the first Saturday in May, with invitations extended to every customer, neighbor, and supporter who had helped them navigate the renovation process. Emma threw herself into planning the event, wanting it to properly celebrate not just the new space, but the community that had made the transition possible. Local musicians volunteered to provide entertainment, neighbors offered to help with decorations, and suppliers provided ingredients for a special menu featuring both traditional favorites and new offerings designed to showcase the expanded kitchen capabilities. The planning process felt like organizing a wedding or family reunion, a celebration of relationships rather than just a business milestone. "This is bigger than I expected," David observed as they reviewed the guest list that had grown to include nearly 200 people. "It should be big," Emma replied, addressing invitations with careful handwriting. "This represents 2 years of work and 25 years of building community. People want to be part of celebrating that achievement." As opening day approached, Emma felt a mixture of pride, anxiety, and anticipation that reminded her of graduation ceremonies she'd attended in foster care, moments when institutional chapters ended and uncertain but hopeful futures began. The difference was that this time she wasn't moving on alone to face unknown circumstances. She was part of something stable and valued, surrounded by people who wanted her to succeed and would support her through whatever challenges lay ahead. The night before reopening, Emma walked through the completed restaurant with David and Patricia, marveling at the transformation they'd achieved while preserving the essential qualities that made Rosewood special. The new space felt both familiar and exciting, honoring the past while embracing possibilities for the future that none of them could have imagined just months earlier. The morning of the grand reopening dawned crisp and clear, with May sunshine streaming through the spotless new windows of Rosewood Family Restaurant. Emma arrived at 5 in the morning to find both Patricia and David already there, moving through final preparations with nervous energy that had replaced their usual calm efficiency. The restaurant gleamed from days of detailed cleaning, every surface polished to perfection, fresh flowers arranged on each table, and the aroma of Miguel's special celebration breakfast filling the air. "I can't believe this day is finally here," Patricia said, adjusting the placement of photographs on the restored mural wall for the third time. 25 years of building this place, and now it feels like we're starting all over again. Emma understood Patricia's mixture of excitement and anxiety. The renovation had preserved everything essential about Rosewood while expanding its capacity to serve the community, but change always carried risks alongside opportunities. They'd invested everything, financially, emotionally, and professionally, in the belief that their expanded vision would succeed. David emerged from the kitchen, carrying the last of the new equipment manuals, his usual composed demeanor showing cracks of nervousness. "Miguel says the kitchen is running perfectly, all systems tested and ready. The food will be the best we've ever served." Emma looked around the transformed space, noting details that still amazed her after months of planning and construction. The community bulletin board near the entrance already held a dozen announcements from neighbors excited about the reopening. The children's corner featured built-in seating and storage for books and games that would keep families comfortable during longer visits. The expanded counter area allowed for more efficient service while maintaining sightlines that let staff monitor the entire dining room. "Are you ready for this?" David asked Emma as they made final adjustments to table settings. Emma considered the questions seriously. 6 months ago, she'd been a waitress grateful for steady employment and a place that felt like home. Now she was a business owner preparing to host a celebration that would determine whether their expanded vision for community service could succeed in a changing neighborhood. "I'm terrified," she admitted, "but also more excited than I've ever been about anything." The first guests arrived 30 minutes before the official opening, long-time customers who couldn't wait to see the transformation. Mrs. Rodriguez entered with her twins, now old enough to run ahead and explore the new children's area with delighted squeals. Mr. Davidson followed closely behind, his weathered face breaking into a wide smile as he took in the expanded space while heading directly toward his traditional booth. "It's perfect," Mrs. Rodriguez declared, spinning slowly to take in every detail. "Different but exactly the same. How did you manage that?" Emma felt tears prick her eyes at the approval in Mrs. Rodriguez's voice. They'd worked so hard to balance preservation with improvement, maintaining the restaurant's essential character while expanding its capacity to serve the community. Hearing that they'd succeeded from someone whose opinion mattered felt like the highest possible praise. Dr. Martinez arrived with his entire family, including teenagers Emma had never met, who looked around the restaurant with curiosity rather than the boredom she'd expected from kids visiting their father's regular breakfast spot. The new space felt more welcoming to different age groups, she realized, with varied seating options and amenities that appealed to diverse needs. "This is where Dad comes every morning?" Dr. Martinez's daughter asked, settling into one of the new booths with obvious comfort. "It's actually really nice." Emma watched families explore the space with growing confidence that their design choices had been correct. The restaurant felt more spacious without losing intimacy, more efficient without sacrificing personal attention, more modern while honoring its history and community mission. Miguel emerged from the kitchen wearing his best apron and a huge grin, accepting congratulations from customers who'd missed his cooking during the reduced capacity renovation period. His pride in the new facilities was evident as he described expanded capabilities that would allow him to offer daily specials and seasonal menus that had been impossible in the old setup. "Now I can make my grandmother's pozole," Miguel announced to a gathering crowd of regular customers. "Been wanting to share that recipe for years, but needed proper equipment." Emma noted the excitement in customers' voices as they discussed new menu possibilities and expanded seating that would accommodate larger family gatherings. The renovation had created opportunities for deepening existing relationships while attracting new community members who might not have felt comfortable in the more cramped original space. Patricia worked the room with renewed energy, greeting each customer personally and sharing stories about specific renovation choices that had been influenced by their preferences and needs. Her joy in showing off the improvements was infectious, and Emma watched customers respond with enthusiasm that bordered on genuine celebration. "This booth was redesigned based on your feedback about back support," Patricia told elderly Mr. Chen, helping him settle into seating that featured improved cushioning and ergonomic design. "We wanted everyone to be comfortable spending time here." David moved between groups with quiet efficiency, ensuring that service ran smoothly while accepting congratulations on the business expansion. Emma noticed how naturally he developed relationships with regular customers during the renovation period, learning their stories and preferences in ways that demonstrated genuine interest rather than professional politeness. The morning rush expanded into something more like a community festival as word spread through the neighborhood about the reopening celebration. Customers Emma had never seen before appeared alongside familiar faces, drawn by curiosity about the renovation and recommendations from neighbors who'd remained loyal throughout the construction period. "We heard about this place from the Martinezes," a young couple explained as Emma seated them at one of the new tables. "They said it was the heart of the neighborhood, somewhere we needed to experience." Emma felt pride swell in her chest at this description of Rosewood as essential rather than optional, a destination that newcomers sought out rather than stumbled upon. The restaurant had become something more than a business. It was a symbol of what made the neighborhood worth preserving, even as it evolved and grew. The lunch crowd brought additional validation, as former customers who drifted away during the renovation period returned to discover improvements that addressed concerns they'd never voiced directly. Better lighting made reading easier for older customers. Improved acoustics reduced background noise that had made conversation difficult, and expanded menu options accommodated dietary restrictions that had previously limited some people's ability to enjoy full meals. "I can actually bring my whole book club here now," commented a woman Emma vaguely remembered from occasional breakfast visits. "The space is big enough for 8 people to sit comfortably, and the lighting is perfect for discussing what we've read." Emma realized they'd successfully expanded Rosewood's role from individual dining destination to community gathering space, capable of hosting group activities and special events. The renovation had multiplied their ability to serve the neighborhood's social and cultural needs, alongside its basic requirement for affordable quality food. Around 2 o'clock, Jennifer Walsh from Pinnacle Development arrived with several colleagues, surveying the completed renovation with obvious satisfaction. Their presence reminded Emma of how dramatically circumstances had changed since the initial development threat that had seemed to endanger everything they valued about Rosewood. "This exceeds our expectations," Jennifer told Patricia as they toured the expanded facilities. "You've created exactly the kind of community anchor we hoped would emerge from this partnership. The foot traffic alone has increased property values throughout the block." Emma listened to this conversation with mixed feelings, appreciating the developer's satisfaction while hoping that rising property values wouldn't price out the working-class families who formed Rosewood's core customer base. The challenge of serving long-time community members while attracting newcomers would require ongoing attention and careful balancing. David seemed to understand her concerns, joining the conversation to discuss plans for maintaining affordable pricing and community programming that would preserve Rosewood's accessibility regardless of neighborhood economic changes. His business background helped him articulate strategies for sustainable growth that protected the restaurant's mission while ensuring financial viability. The afternoon brought surprise visits from people whose connections to Rosewood stretched back years or even decades. Former employees returned to see the renovated space. Longtime customers brought extended family members to share the celebration, and neighborhood business owners stopped by to congratulate Patricia on her successful adaptation to changing circumstances. "This was my first job," a middle-aged woman told Emma, introducing herself as someone who'd worked at Rosewood 15 years earlier. "Patricia taught me everything I know about customer service and treating people with dignity. I own my own catering business now, but I learned the basics right here." Emma felt moved by these testimonials that revealed Rosewood's impact extending far beyond its immediate customer base. The restaurant had served as training ground, community center, and symbol of stability for people whose lives had been shaped by their experiences within its walls. As evening approached, the celebration took on a more intimate quality as the crowd thinned to include mainly long-time customers and close supporters who'd stayed to properly honor the milestone. Patricia stood behind the counter, visibly tired but glowing with satisfaction as she surveyed the successful day. "Speech!" called out Dr. Martinez, and soon the remaining customers were encouraging Patricia to share her thoughts about the renovation and Rosewood's future. Patricia accepted a microphone David had borrowed from the local musicians, her voice carrying clearly through the dining room that had grown quiet with anticipation. 25 years ago, I opened this restaurant because I wanted to create a place where families could afford to gather, where neighbors could become friends, where everyone who walked through our door would feel welcome." Emma watched the faces around the room as Patricia continued, seeing reflected back the genuine affection and respect that had sustained the restaurant through challenges and changes. These weren't just customers, they were participants in a community experiment that had succeeded beyond anyone's original expectations. Today marks not just a renovation, but a recommitment to those original values, Patricia continued. "My partners Emma and David have helped me understand that preserving tradition doesn't mean avoiding change. It means adapting thoughtfully while keeping our core mission intact." Patricia's eyes found Emma's across the room, and Emma felt the weight of recognition and responsibility that came with being acknowledged as a leader in this community institution. The scared foster child who'd learned to make herself invisible had become someone whose contributions were celebrated publicly. "Emma taught me that kindness doesn't require permission, that small acts of caring can change lives in ways we never anticipate," Patricia said. "David showed me that coming home isn't about returning to exactly what existed before, but about bringing new skills to serve old values." The applause that followed felt like blessing and challenge combined, acknowledgement of what they'd achieved alongside expectation for what they might accomplish in the future. Emma felt the weight of community trust settling around her shoulders like a mantle she was still learning to wear. As the evening wound down and the last customers reluctantly prepared to leave, Emma found herself standing with David and Patricia in the quiet restaurant, surrounded by evidence of their successful collaboration. Plates and glasses had been cleared, chairs stacked on tables, but the satisfaction of a day well executed lingered in the warm air. "We did it," David said simply, his voice carrying wonder at what they'd accomplished together. "We did," Patricia agreed, reaching out to squeeze both Emma's and David's hands. "And this is just the beginning." Emma looked around the restaurant that had become her home, her workplace, and her future, understanding finally that belonging wasn't something you found, but something you built through daily choices to care for people and places that mattered. The grand reopening had been a celebration of renovation completed, but more importantly, it marked the beginning of a new chapter in her own story of finding family and purpose. Outside, Denver's city lights twinkled through the large windows. But inside Rosewood Family Restaurant, three partners stood together in comfortable silence, knowing they'd created something that would outlast any individual while honoring the connections that made community possible. 2 years later, Emma stood in the same spot where she'd once served David his first cup of coffee. But everything had changed in ways she never could have imagined. The morning sun streamed through windows that now overlooked a bustling neighborhood where Rosewood had become the anchor point for a thriving community renaissance. She wore a simple white dress, her hands shaking slightly as she adjusted the small bouquet of yellow daisies that matched the pattern on the chipped blue mug that still sat in its place of honor behind the counter. "You ready for this?" Patricia asked, appearing beside her with tears already streaming down her cheeks. At 80, Patricia moved more slowly but with undiminished joy, especially today as she prepared to walk Emma down the aisle in the restaurant that had brought them all. And together, Emma nodded, though her voice caught when she tried to speak. Outside, through the large windows, she could see the guests gathering in the small garden space that Pinnacle Development had created specifically for community events. Mrs. Rodriguez was there with her twins, now old enough to serve as flower girls. Dr. Martinez had brought his entire extended family, and Mr. Davidson sat in the front row wearing his best suit and a smile that hadn't left his face since Emma had asked him to give a reading during the ceremony. David waited at the makeshift altar that Miguel had decorated with flowers from the restaurant's new rooftop garden. He wore his dress military uniform at Emma's request, looking every inch the soldier who'd found his way home. The past 2 years had been kind to him. The cancer remained in remission, his nightmares had faded, and the careful tension he'd carried when he first returned to Denver had been replaced by quiet confidence and genuine happiness. "How did we get here?" Emma whispered, watching through the window as David laughed at something Miguel was saying while they made final adjustments to the flower arrangements. "One cup of coffee at a time," Patricia replied, using the phrase that had become their family motto. One small kindness building on another until something beautiful emerged. The ceremony itself was unlike anything Emma had ever imagined for herself. For someone who'd spent her childhood believing she was unworthy of permanent love, being surrounded by nearly 100 people who'd chosen to celebrate her happiness felt surreal. The vows she and David exchanged weren't just promises to each other, they were commitments to the community they'd built together, to the restaurant that had saved them both, to the future they would create as partners in every sense of the word. "I promise to see you," David said, when it was his turn to speak, his words carrying weight from their shared understanding of what it meant to feel invisible. "Not just today, but every day, in all the ways you matter." Emma's response came from a place of courage she'd discovered gradually over 2 years of being valued and trusted. "I promise to build home with you, not just in this place we love, but wherever life takes us, creating belonging for ourselves and others who need it. When they kissed as husband and wife, the applause that erupted from their guests echoed off the surrounding buildings, a celebration that seemed to embrace the entire neighborhood. Emma opened her eyes to see customers from Rosewood cheering alongside their wedding guests, the distinction between family and community having blurred completely. The reception took place in the restaurant itself, with tables arranged to accommodate everyone from Patricia's elderly bridge club to the young families who discovered Rosewood during the renovation. Miguel had outdone himself with a menu that honored both David's military service and Emma's journey from foster care to business ownership, creating dishes that told their story through carefully chosen ingredients and preparation methods. "This is better than any fancy wedding venue," commented Dr. Martinez's daughter as she helped serve cake to the younger children. "You can feel how much this place means to everyone here." Emma realized the truth of that observation as she looked around the restaurant filled with people whose lives had intersected through shared meals, difficult times weathered together, and celebrations that had strengthened the bonds between neighbors. They hadn't just gotten married in a restaurant, they'd committed to each other in the heart of the community they'd spent 2 years nurturing and protecting. As the evening progressed, stories emerged that reminded Emma of the journey that had brought them to this moment. Mrs. Rodriguez spoke about how Rosewood had been her sanctuary during her divorce, providing stability and friendship when her world felt chaotic. Mr. Davidson described the way Patricia and Emma had quietly helped him through his wife's illness, bringing meals to his house and checking on him during the hardest months of grief. "Emma saved my life without knowing it," shared a young woman Emma barely recognized. "I was aging out of foster care, scared and alone, when I saw your job posting for youth mentorship. The skills I learned here led to my current career in social work." David's eyes found Emma's across the room as story after story revealed the ripple effects of kindness they'd set in motion. The restaurant had become more than a business. It was a catalyst for community healing and growth that extended far beyond its physical walls. The evening's most moving moment came when Patricia stood to offer a toast, her voice carrying clearly through the dining room that had witnessed so many significant conversations. 2 years ago, my son came home to a mother who'd been waiting 8 years for a chance to forgive and be forgiven. Emma gave him the grace to take that first step, just as she's given all of us the gift of her presence and caring. Patricia's gaze swept the room, taking in faces that represented decades of relationships built over shared meals and mutual support. But tonight isn't just about celebrating a wedding, it's about recognizing what we've built together. Proof that families can be chosen, that home can be created, and that the smallest acts of kindness can change everything. As the celebration wound down and guests began reluctantly preparing to leave, Emma and David found themselves exactly where they'd met, at table 12, sharing coffee and watching the restaurant slowly empty. The chipped blue mug sat between them on the table, no longer a symbol of loss, but a reminder of resilience and the possibility of finding treasure in unexpected places. "Any regrets?" David asked, reaching across the table to take her hand. Emma considered the question seriously, thinking about all the wrong turns and difficult years that had led her to this moment. "None," she said finally. "Every placement, every disappointment, every time I felt invisible, it all brought me here to this family, to you." Outside, Denver's lights stretched toward the mountains, but inside Rosewood Family Restaurant, newlyweds sat in comfortable silence, knowing they'd found something worth preserving and sharing with others who needed what they'd discovered. 6 months later, Emma and David opened their second location in a struggling neighborhood across town, hiring exclusively from the foster care system and creating another anchor point for community building. Patricia, now officially retired but unofficially still involved in every major decision, had begun writing a cookbook that would share not just recipes but stories about the power of food to create connections. The last cup of coffee had indeed been just the beginning. Sometimes the most profound changes begin with the smallest gestures: a cup of coffee offered without expectation, a kind word spoken to someone who feels invisible, a moment of grace extended when someone needs it most. Emma and David's story reminds us that we never know how our simple acts of kindness might echo through time, creating connections that transform lives in ways we may never fully understand. If this story touched your heart today, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales of ordinary people whose extraordinary kindness changes the world around them. Your own small acts of caring are never wasted. They're seeds that grow into communities, families, and hope that lasts for generations. Has someone offered you a last cup when you needed it most? Share your story in the comments below and let us know how kindness has shaped your own journey. Join us next week for another story of quiet heroes and the incredible power of human connection. Remember, sometimes the last cup is just the beginning of everything beautiful that's meant to come.